Welcome to the beautiful Wells Fargo Center in Des Moines, Wells Fargo Arena, excuse me. I knew I was going to get that wrong at some point this weekend. Or restart that one. I'm Brendan Dzwierzynski. This is Dan Lucero. You are watching us on the Lewis Toyota Road to a Championship from Wells Fargo Arena in Des Moines, site of the second round of the NCAA tournament, where the Kansas Jayhawks will take on the... Now I'm being distracted. There's people all over the place. I'm getting totally thrown off by this video. They're taking on the Arkansas Razorbacks coming up here in just a few minutes. Well, a couple hours from now, really. And what is, well, we heard on local radio here in Des Moines, the most exciting game of the day, apparently. Apparently, this is one of the most hyped up games of the day. But, Dan, before we get to any of the actual matchup here, and man, there's a lot of stuff to break down there, we've got to get to the coaching news for KU. No Bill Self in this game. It was announced on Saturday morning. He is unavailable, still going through recovery after that heart procedure he had last week. And look, I said this on 580 Sports Talk on Friday. I think this is the game where you really need him back. You want his tactical stylings, so to speak, back on the court. Norm Roberts can handle his own business, but this is going to be tough without Bill Self out there.
Yeah, he's so great at making those in-game adjustments, calling the right plays, being able to adjust to whatever an opposing team might throw at you that maybe you didn't get on the film or didn't see a lot of on film. That's his gift. That's why he's probably the best coach going in college basketball, and his peers, I think, would say the same. Certainly, I think Bill Self would give anything to be able to be coaching this game, and it's got to believe this is on the advice of his doctors that not to push it, not to come back too soon for the sake of his health, which is way more important than any basketball game. So, but we talked about this a little bit on yesterday's edition of 580 Sports Talk. Norm Roberts has been a Bill Self assistant going on about 25 years. They've been together for a very long time.
With a brief break to become a head coach on his own in a power conference.
Right, exactly. And so that would be the hope, is that there's that enough of that mind meld there between Self and Roberts that and I mean, we've seen pretty good results. I mean, they're 6-1, I believe, with well, let me check on that. They were
7-1 now.
Yeah, 7-1 after the win over Howard with Norm Roberts on the sideline. So obviously you continue to wish Bill Self the best as he recovers, but the hope is that Norm Roberts can be that steady guiding hand that he has been to this point.
Now, in terms of actually breaking down this game and what is going to happen when we get on the floor, how important is actually having the guy who can pull all the right strings at the right moment versus just having the right game plan? Because we know Bill Self has been here in Des Moines as long as the team has been. He's been with them in practice. He's been talking to them pregame, after the game, all that. It's just a matter of, hey, look, it's a stressful thing to be coaching in a game. That's a lot of stress to put on your body, your heart, whatever it might end up being. But how important is just having that game plan down versus having the right guy who knows when to make individual switches, individual small changes? Because I think that's the big difference here.
Yeah, and especially if Kansas falls behind early, if Arkansas throws some junk defenses at the Jayhawks, those are the kinds of things where you want the head coach to be running the show because he's more prepared for that and has seen more of those things. But as far as the broader game plan that Kansas is going to come in, that's a Bill Self-authored game plan. And I'm sure that they've got punches and counter punches kind of under consideration already as they turn on some music here at Wells Fargo Arena. We'll get a little musical accompaniment during this. We're going to get DMCA'd, man. They're going to rip this down immediately. We can say whatever we want. Freedom. I do think that whatever Kansas comes into this game with is going to be a Bill Self game plan. And when we talk about Arkansas with junk defenses, I think Kansas might throw a little bit of junk defense at Arkansas as well because they're really good at getting to the rim. They don't shoot a lot of threes. This would be a team that maybe you throw a little bit of zone at because you try and make up for your relative lack of size to Arkansas. I know Bill Self is loath to play zone, but this might be a team where it makes a little sense to start a possession in a 2-3 and then come out of it into a matchup zone. We'll see what kind of wrinkles that Self and Norm Roberts and the Jayhawks have in this matchup.
And I think in particular in a game where you need to have your best players on the floor as much as possible. No disrespect meant to the Pettifords, the Yesifus. Now, Uday might be an interesting piece because he is so big and so athletic to match up with these Arkansas players. Norm Roberts even told us that yesterday. But you need to have Jalen Wilson out there as many minutes as possible. You need Kevin McCullough and DeJuan Harris out there as many minutes as possible. If you get into a situation where you've got some foul trouble, well, the ultimate way to try to protect yourself from that, or if that becomes the case, is to go to a zone, is to end up in a situation where, hey, we don't have to, attack as much. We don't have to be quite as aggressive on an up and down basis every single possession of the game. So maybe that's a situation you have to go to it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that at some point. Now, I mentioned Ernest Uday, and I think he is an interesting piece here because Arkansas is absurdly athletic. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Norm Roberts said he doesn't think there's anyone in the country that's got the kind of athletes 1 through 13 that Arkansas has. Uday, I think, is an interesting piece coming off the bench because he's one of the most athletic beasts that KU has, really. I mean, with the length, the speed, the surprisingly quick hands for a freshman big man. Who are the other guys you think in this game, or even one other guy who feels like you have to get an A-plus game out of him if Kansas needs to win?
Well, the easy answer, Jalen Wilson, right? Because he's the first-team All-American.
Right.
He's the guy that has been carrying the torch offensively all season long. And if you're going to match this team bucket for bucket, because even though Arkansas doesn't shoot the three very well, they're still an efficient offensive team because they score so well around the rim. You're going to need to match that, and Jalen Wilson's your best finisher. So certainly he's going to have to play well. And then there's the barometer, DeJuan Harris. He's a guy that, Arkansas is going to lean on, try and pressure, try and force into some mistakes, probably guard him 94 feet. Well, we'll see how Harris handles that. I mean, it's nothing he hasn't seen before. Certainly, he's got to play composed. He's got to make good decisions with the basketball, because when he does that, Kansas usually wins, regardless of – I mean, this won't be the first time they've been at an athletic disadvantage against a team this year. There have been other teams in the Big 12 that are more athletic. There are other teams in the Big 12 that score well around the rim or are bigger. There are other teams in the Big 12 who play 94 feet of pressure defense like you might see from Arkansas in this game. But Kansas has been able to beat opponents like that because they do play steadily. And as you discussed when we were talking yesterday on 580 Sports Talk, they play with a calmness. They play with a poise of a team that, even though they haven't all been here before, they play like they have. And especially Wilson and Harris, they definitely have. They were important players on last year's championship team, so they're going to be important players today in a game where their championship supremacy is challenged.
And I really do think that the number one guy I'm focused on in this game for KU is DeJuan Harris, and is on the offensive end more than anything. I trust that defensively he's going to do just fine. I mean, Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. But the ability to, A, not make mistakes with the basketball, which generally speaking, he's darn good at, one of the best assist-to-turnover ratios in the Bill Self era at KU. But he has got to be able to still be aggressive and try to attack, try to penetrate, get to that right-hand float game as much as possible in this matchup. Arkansas is going to be physical. They are going to be tough to drive against, to attack against, but you've got to find a way to try to still play your game, even though it's an adverse situation. And like you said, when Harris has been at his best this year, KU's won pretty much exclusively. They've had very few problems with teams. When he has struggled, KU has struggled. He is the you go, we go player, and I think this is the kind of game where you need him to be at his best and needs to be that calming presence. Jalen Wilson can do that, and he's the vocal leader for this team, but he doesn't have the ball in his hands quite that much. DeJuan Harris has the ball in his hands every single possession for the majority of the possession. You've got to make sure he is at his absolute best. I do want to revisit one thing. Coaches, players on both sides were asked about this, and you alluded to it too. Is there a Big 12 team that you compare Arkansas to? We had Norm Roberts say that in terms of natural athleticism, it's probably Texas, but then some KU players said, well, it's maybe more like a West Virginia or a TCU. Is there anyone who you can draw even something of a parallel to from the Big 12 for this Arkansas team?
Now, I think Texas is a good comparison because of their ability in the mid-range. I think offensively, Texas might be the best analog. A bit of Texas, a bit of TCU. TCU, not a great three-point shooting team. Arkansas, not a great three-point shooting team. So the Arkansas solution is just not shoot a lot of them. They want to try and get the ball to the rim like TCU does and like Texas does. And if Texas can't get to the rim, they've got guys who can make those mid-range shots like Allen and Carr. Those guys are so tough in the mid-range, and Arkansas's got guys like that too that are really tough in the mid-range. So, yeah, I certainly think there are some stylistic comparisons in that way. And then defensively, like if Arkansas is going to walk the talk, what they were talking about yesterday, and being in your face on defense for 40 minutes, that's very much like Iowa State. It's very much like West Virginia. So it's an amalgamation, and it's why playing in the Big 12, best conference in the country, prepares KU so well for games like this when they get into the tournament, because there's nothing that they really haven't seen before.
And KU has been playing, generally speaking, aside from that Texas game, KU has been playing really darn well down the stretch of the season. Arkansas, they had a good win against Illinois in the opening round, but they have been flawed against major competition this year. Non-conference play, they opened up the year 11-1. They went into the tournament after that going 10-12. Like, they were not overly impressive for a large portion of the season going into that game against Illinois on Thursday. We, of course, are going to have full coverage post-game of this KU versus Arkansas game on all of our social channels. That includes on the 580 WIBW News Facebook page with our post-game live video, as well as on YouTube. Sports on 580 WIBW is the channel you might be watching already right now. Plus, we are going to have our gamer and post-game audio available to you at 580WIBW.com. Final prediction before we go?
KU wins. It's going to be tight. It's going to be down to the marrow, but I like KU by 4 tonight, 76-72.
I'm going to go even smaller than that. I'm going to give Kansas 76 as well. I think Arkansas 75. I think this is almost a true coin toss game, especially without Bill Self out there. I think KU's ability, or just the fact that KU has been there before, I think is going to help push them over the top in this contest today. We will find out, though. Again, 580WIBW.com and all of our 580WIBW sports social media channels is where you can find our post-game coverage. Until then, after the KU game, for Dan Lucero, I'm Brendan Dzwierzynski. We'll talk to you then, hopefully, after a Kansas Jayhawks win here in Des Moines at the